When we're in self restoration and we are, for the most part, surrounding ourselves with things that feel good, that help us feel safe, experiences and relationships and opportunities and spaces that just feel aligned, you can't help but feel good most of the time in your life and you're not stuck.
Welcome to Season of Stuck, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the all too human experience of feeling stuck. I'm your host, Deanna, and on this podcast, we explore all things stuck. How and why stuckness happens, what it feels like, how to learn and grow from it, and ultimately, how to get unstuck and move forward in an authentic, empowered way. If you are looking for insights, support, and community as you make your journey from stuck to unstuck, you're in the right place. Now, let's jump into today's episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Season of Stuck. I am your host, Deanna. If this is your first time listening, welcome. And if this is not your first time listening, welcome back. Before I started this podcast, I always experienced stuckness as really lonely and really isolating. It felt like a personal failure. So if you've experienced stuckness in the same way, my hope is that listening to this podcast can help you shift your perspective and realize that feeling stuck is not a you thing, and you are not a failure. Stuckness is a universal human experience. We all go through it. And I'm just so happy and grateful that you're here and that we get to explore this experience together. So, thank you for tuning in. So, back in episode 11, we talked to the incredible Dr. Ashley Southard on a relationship dynamic that many people, and especially many women, get stuck in. And that is overfunctioning. And more specifically, overfunctioning in love. Dr. Ashley defines overfunctioning as doing for your partner what they can and should be doing for themselves, carrying far too much of the relational load, and feeling like you're asking for too much, when really you're asking for too little. And this can set up a relational cycle that can make you feel really stuck. Many overfunctioning women tend to think that if they just do a little bit more, if they're just a little more supportive, or give their partner a little more grace, or do just a little bit more to keep the relationship moving forward, that their partner will notice all they're doing and start doing more too. But according to Dr. Ashley, the opposite is actually true. The more you overfunction, the easier it is for your partner to underfunction. And so it goes until you're left feeling stuck in resentment and exhaustion and frustration with the relationship. Does this dynamic sound familiar? If it does, let me just say you are not alone. The response to Dr. Ashley's episode was overwhelming. So many of you reached out to share how deeply you related to overfunctioning and the stuckness that goes along with it. And so, knowing that this is such a stuck point for so many people, it got me thinking about how to get unstuck from this dynamic. How do we begin to heal from this pattern? How do we step back from overfunctioning and create more balanced, fulfilling relationships, both with ourselves and with our partner? And that is exactly what we're diving into today with the return of Dr. Ashley Southard. Dr. Ashley is a marriage and family therapist who specializes in helping overfunctioning women heal and restore themselves through what she calls the self-restoration process. After experiencing and healing from her own journey with overfunctioning, Dr. Ashley has created a powerful framework to help other women come home to themselves and build lives that feel authentic, intentional, and truly fulfilling. During our conversation, Dr. Ashley guides us through the self-restoration process, including how to start centering your own needs, even when it feels uncomfortable, why your partner's response to your healing is their responsibility and not yours, and how to navigate the fear and discomfort that often comes with stepping back from overfunctioning. We also explore what happens when one partner grows while the other stays stuck, and how to know if your relationship is evolving with you. This conversation is for anyone who's ready to, in the words of Dr. Ashley, stop orbiting around others and start coming home to themselves. Now, if you didn't catch our first episode with Dr. Southard, I highly suggest you go back and give it a listen. That episode takes a much more in depth look at what it means to overfunction, where that drive comes from, and how it can manifest in relationships. While today's episode is more focused on how to heal from overfunctioning. So if you missed that episode, I would definitely consider revisiting it as it will provide some context for the themes we explore today. Okay, that being said, let's jump into my conversation with Dr. Ashley. Dr. Southard, thank you so much for being here and coming back to do another episode of Season of Stuck.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me again.
As I was telling you before we jumped on this recording, your original episode, which was on overfunctioning in relationships and specifically women as overfunctioners, was so powerful and really resonated with so many people. I got so much feedback on how the things that you shared really hit home for so many listeners. So I'm really excited to continue the conversation and really hone in on not just how and why we get stuck in overfunctioning, but how we can actually heal that, step back from the overfunctioning, and get unstuck in the process.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that this content is resonating in a way that feels helpful. It always makes me sad that it's resonating with so many people because it's so painful. But to come together and to make sense out of things and to rediscover our own power and ability to heal and do that together, you've created such a safe space in this podcast to do that. So thank you.
Mm, thank you. That means so much to me. I guess to kick things off, I know that you've been on the podcast before, but just in case some of our listeners missed that first episode, I would love if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work.
Sure. So my name is Dr. Ashley Southard. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I practice in Scottsdale, Arizona. I see clients all week. I work primarily with individuals and couples who are stuck in this overfunctioning, underfunctioning dynamic. And I do a lot of work with individual women primarily who are stuck in the overfunctioning. So helping them figure out what the heck is going on and how can they get themselves unstuck. And so I've been practicing for 22 years and have really very much enjoyed working with people and helping them find their way through life's ups and downs. I also have a very personal story around overfunctioning. So I was married and started to discover this overfunctioning, underfunctioning dynamic that I was stuck in and slowly started to crawl my way out of it and heal myself and took to Instagram to start writing about what I was discovering, what I was learning, what I was making sense out of. And this incredible community of women has been created where over 70,000 women are going, oh my gosh, that's my story too. And so we're all healing together. And I think that's what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, and there is so much power in women coming together to heal as a collective. I think that experiences like overfunctioning or like stuckness can feel really personal and isolating. But when you start talking about your own experiences, like you did, you took to Instagram to share about what you were discovering, it's so empowering for other women who can say, "Oh, I thought that was just me. Like, I thought this was my problem." But actually, there are more people who are experiencing what I am. And just as importantly, there are people that are healing from what I'm experiencing. So maybe that means I can heal too.
Right. There's hope. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think one of the most common things I hear from women that I work with or who follow my work say, I thought I was crazy. And what I say is, you're actually not crazy, but you are in crazy. And that's why you feel crazy. So let's make sense out of the craziness that you're in. Let's help you rediscover yourself, reconnect you with your clarity and your power, and see what you want to do with that. And that's the process that I call self restoration, restoring yourself, coming back home to yourself, and healing the wounds that kind of set the stage for overfunctioning to even become a thing in your life.
And I am so excited to take a deep dive into the self restoration process.
Yeah.
But just briefly, before we get into the healing element, in case someone didn't listen to our more comprehensive interview about overfunctioning as a whole. So, what exactly is overfunctioning and how and why is it so prevalent in women specifically?
So, overfunctioning, I talk about overfunctioning in love because I think this is the most dominant space in our lives where this is going to show up, but it can certainly be in other relationships as well. But overfunctioning in love is really carrying the bulk of the load, if you will, in the relationship. You are the one who's doing pretty much all of the work to make sure that this relationship is working. So, a lot of overfunctioning is very emotional. It is about making sure that the conversations to keep the relationship healthy are being initiated. It's the one who's thinking about the connection in the relationship, planning the date nights, trying to resolve the conflict. And there's this sense that it's a one sided dynamic where you are doing a lot of the work and your partner isn't really doing much work to keep the relationship going. So, what can happen is you're pouring yourself into this, you're not getting a lot back. And over time, you get really, really depleted, you get really burnt out, and you get really resentful. And it becomes this dynamic where you're doing more to hold it all together because there's this sense that if you stop doing it, it's all going to fall apart. If you don't bring up the conversations, if you don't keep your finger on the pulse of the relationship, if you don't read the books and send the Instagram reels and make the therapy appointments, nothing's going to happen. And so it sets you up to be doing more and more and more. They're doing less and less and less because they're very comfortable letting you do it all. And eventually you're exhausted, you're burnt out, you're resentful, and you're faced with this really tough fork in the road. Do I continue to do this and burn myself out more? Do I stay or do I go?
Mm. And you spoke earlier about healing the wounds that allowed overfunctioning to kind of flourish in the first place. So, in your experience, where does this dynamic stem from? Like, why do women end up overfunctioning within their relationships?
Yeah. Well, overfunctioning is made up of a lot of beautiful traits. So it's overgiving, it's over accommodating, it's just overdoing, overthinking, considering them. So I'll kind of describe it as like orbiting around them all the time. And when we're overfunctioning in love, we're overfunctioning with our partner. We're orbiting around them. We're thinking about what are they feeling? What are they needing? What would make their life easier? And so I think these are some natural traits that a lot of girls and women are socialized to do. I think a lot of us tend to do this very naturally. We have that carrying bone in us. And then we take it too far, right? So we go in and we just pour out all of this love and we kind of think that if we give them more, they'll realize what a sacrifice we're making and they'll realize how much we love them. And then they'll go, oh, I want to return the favor. And then they'll start reciprocating and pouring that same love back into us. But unfortunately, that's not what happens. So I think that's why this affects women a lot. It's built upon traits that are really beautiful, but we take it too far. So, where does this come from? It does tend to trace back into the early years of our life because this is an attachment strategy. This is a way that we show up in our relationship, thinking that if we overfunction, then we will earn our love. If I just work a little bit harder, if I just give a little bit more, then they'll be happy with me. Then they'll be nice to me. Then they'll engage with me. And that belief system, which is really rooted in your subconscious mind, this isn't typically something that we're walking around actively thinking about or actively aware of, unless and until we listen to podcasts like this and realize it. But these types of subconscious beliefs typically get formed in the very early years of our life. So our primary subconscious beliefs are formed in the first 10 years of life. So if you look at what were your primary relationships during the first 10 years of your life, that's probably where you started to develop these beliefs and these overfunctioning traits. Maybe you had a parent who was overfunctioning and you really modeled that behavior, and or you may have had an underfunctioning parent who was not pulling their weight as a parent or a partner perhaps, and you were watching that and thinking, okay, I'm going to have to work extra hard to get this parent to engage with me. So there's a lot of ways in which overfunctioning can be rooted in those childhood relationships and childhood experiences that, unbeknownst to us, we just carry right into adulthood and we apply those to our adult love relationships.
And I'm curious, because the root of overfunctioning often ties back to early childhood experiences, early childhood attachment, and, potentially like kind of core wounds that we developed during that time. Do women who are prone to overfunctioning often find themselves attracted to partners that are underfunctioning? Like, is that where the dynamic ends up playing out?
Yeah, because it's very much a cycle that fuels itself. So, to the degree that you are over functioning, you're very likely going to subconsciously choose a partner who is under functioning to a similar degree. And like Lego pieces or puzzle pieces, they just fit together. It doesn't necessarily feel great, but it feels very familiar. And here's the thing about the subconscious mind and the way the human mind works: we don't necessarily pursue what feels good, we pursue what feels familiar.
Mhm.
So you'll hear women say, why do I go after the bad boy? Why don't I go after the quote unquote good guy, right? And it's like, well, if your subconscious isn't primed to feel familiar in a relationship with the quote unquote good guy, then you're not going to pursue that.
Well, it's because my understanding is that the brain isn't really designed for us to like live our best lives and
Right.
thrive in every area. It's designed to keep us safe. And
Yes.
our brain recognizes familiarity as safety.
That's right. Yeah, if it's familiar, then I know what to do with this. So if I was in relationships as a young person where over functioning traits like over giving and over accommodating and overthinking, if that helped me navigate those relationships and basically survive those relationships and get the love that I was craving, then yeah, my brain says, well, this is a really good thing to do. So let's keep doing it. And we bring that into adulthood. And of course, then we're naturally going to choose an under functioning partner. And even though it doesn't feel good in the long run, we really do know how to navigate it. Most over functioning women, they can do this in their sleep. They know how to feel guilty. They know how to think about the other person. They know how to reject any offers of, receiving help or support. So, yeah, it becomes this really awful bind of this doesn't feel good, and yet this feels familiar, and I know exactly what to do here.
Mm. So I want to jump into the healing process. But before we jump into that, I want to really talk about the consequences or the challenges that happen when we don't actively pursue healing from overfunctioning. So when women are caught in this cycle of overfunctioning, what are some of the consequences and challenges of living out that dynamic within their partnership?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of them. I think one is that you really get away from yourself. You lose yourself in the relationship because your focus is so much on them and what's happening for them and what they need to feel comfortable or what's going to get them to function, that you've completely forgotten to check in with how you're feeling and what you're needing and what is the relationship experience that you are having. And I find that so often women get into their 40s and 50s, they've been doing this over functioning for decades. And they'll be sitting across from me in my office, and I'll say, well, let's slow this conversation down a little bit. Let's use this example that's come up. And what were you needing in that moment? And they look at me like deer in the headlights, like, I have no idea what I need or want or desire. So I think that's the biggest consequence is we lose ourselves and we can start to feel like this shell of a person who is here to serve everybody else and make sure that their life is feeling good, but we're not feeling good in our own life.
And that can be a really scary place to be, like to realize when you look at your life and have this question of, is this what I want? Are my needs being served? And I don't know if you have seen this reflected in the women that you work with, but I am intimately familiar with overfunctioning. And what I found is that when I allowed myself to stay in this overfunctioning dynamic, it reinforced the story in my head that I must not be deserving of a partner that shows up and like gives as much to the relationship as I do, which then would kind of propel me to overfunction more as like a drive to get more affection, support, whatever it is that I was seeking through the overfunctioning.
Right. Yeah, and the cruel irony here is if they were not under functioning, let's just say for a minute that you have these wounds that say, I don't really deserve anything better, being treated any better. And then your partner does try to function in a more healthy way. Your system would reject it because you don't believe that you deserve it. So subconsciously, you actually need them to underfunction. You need them to ignore you or deprive you or not really factor you in, because if they did give you that attention and they did treat you well, it would be so disruptive to your own beliefs about what you're worthy of and what you're deserving, right? So consciously, you're saying, I want a partner who treats me well. But subconsciously, you're saying, I have no idea what that would be like. That would scare me to death. So I don't want to do that. That's not familiar. So let's stay away from it.
So then the healing process is really reprogramming your brain to be in a position where you don't need or feel the drive to constantly overfunction, to accept a partner that shows up as an equal.
Yes. And eventually to require a partner that shows up as an equal. But yeah, it really is about working through the discomfort and the resistance that you have within yourself to receive the same generous love that you so freely give to your partner. So imagine if your partner was accommodating you and was being flexible to make your life easier and was checking in with how you're feeling and what you're needing and wanting to make sure you're having a good experience. As you consider the possibility of that experience, what happens inside? Do you start to get really uncomfortable with that? Do you feel guilty? Do you feel bad? Do you feel like you don't deserve to be an inconvenience to them? Do you worry that you're going to be a burden or too much for them? That's a big piece for overfunctioning women. We've been led to believe we're too much. We've also been led to believe we're not enough. And so as we start to consider being treated well, what comes up? And those are the beliefs and the discomforts that we've got to work through so that we can be ready to receive healthy functioning from our current partner, from a future partner, from anyone who's in our life, really.
Ugh, I got a literal chill when you said that we as women are trained that we are too much while also being trained that we're not enough. I've never heard it put that way, but when you said it, it was just like a full body, like, yes, that is the experience. Like, we've been conditioned to think that our emotions, our needs, our wants, our desire is too much and we should make ourselves small. But then also that we're not enough the way that we are, which is like antithetical, but also so challenging. Like the mental gymnastics that you have to do to feel that you're both not enough and too much.
Yeah, it's awful. So what do? We just focus on them because it's too complicated inside of ourselves to sort through the too much and the not enough and the feeling guilty and the feeling discomfort and the not feeling worthy. And so we say, I don't know what to do with all of this, but maybe if I can get them happy and get them comfortable, maybe then they'll treat me well and that'll be the answer to all of this. But then if they were to treat you well, like you're not in a place to really truly receive it.
You love podcasts, and so do I. I am always on the hunt for new podcasts, and I've got some good news for you. I have found a podcast that you are going to love. It's called Blue Sky, and it's hosted by Bill Burke. Each week, Bill chats with inspiring people who are tackling the world's toughest challenges with a fresh dose of hope and optimism. Created by the Optimism Institute, Blue Sky is here to balance out all of the doom and gloom we see in the media by offering a positive, forward-thinking view of the future. From climate change to AI, homelessness to immigration, Bill and his guests cover it all, bringing in diverse perspectives that leave you feeling inspired and uplifted. Every episode reminds you that no matter how cloudy things seem, there's always a blue sky above. It's all about shifting your perspective and finding hope in even the hardest conversations. So, if you're ready for a podcast that leaves you feeling good about where we're headed, check out Blue Sky on any major podcast platform. It's the perfect way to clear the clouds and embrace a brighter future. And really, what's better than that? So let's talk about the process of getting to the place where you are ready to receive it. So you have developed your own framework for healing from overfunctioning in love called the self-restoration process.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about what that process entails and how it works?
Yeah. So I like to think of self restoration as this coming back home to yourself. It's about coming back into being the center of your own attention and not in a selfish way. That's usually the first thing that comes up for women when I talk about this. They're like, oh, I don't want to become selfish. And it's not about becoming selfish, it's about becoming focused on yourself to the degree that your feelings, your needs, and your experience matter to you. Because here's the thing, if you don't focus on those and make sure that they're tended to, nobody else is going to do it the way that you need it done. No one's going to do that for you. You can have wonderful people in your life, including your partner, who can accent that. They can be the cherry on top. But you've got to take care of you. And that's requiring that you know what's going on for you. So if you're orbiting around them all the time, you can't be paying attention to what's going on inside for you. So that's the core of the self restoration process. It's about bringing your focus back to you while still considering the ones around you that you love and respect and care for. I don't know any overfunctioning woman who will turn that off. So I always say it's literally not in your DNA to not think about others. That will always be there. We're just trying to bring balance to the system where you can think about them, but you're doing it in the context of thinking about you and taking care of you. So that's going to be a big part of self restoration.
And I would imagine, because even hearing you talk about that, there's like a little bit of discomfort that's coming up for me. So I would imagine women that are used to overfunctioning, the thought of stopping the orbit around their partner and centering themselves in the wants and needs of other people can feel both uncomfortable and scary. So, how can women work through that discomfort and fear to even get the process started?
Yeah. Well, I think it's about finding little spaces where we can start to practice that. Because again, as we talk about the subconscious mind, if we want to change things, we want to become aware of what's going on. And then we want to make small changes that feel a little scary, a little outside of our comfort zone, but not so threatening that our whole system is going to collapse and panic. We don't want that. So I encourage women to first really notice, like, where are you over functioning in love? So where are you orbiting around your partner and losing track of what's going on for you? And in those moments, I want you to ask yourself, what is it that I'm feeling right now? What is it that I'm needing right now? What would feel good to me? And, when we're making change, we don't always jump into behavioral change. So you might stop and ask yourself that, and you might still go do the overfunctioning behavior, and that's okay. I think there's so much pressure and expectation that, well, if you're aware of it, then you must change right away. But I think that can feel like too big of a leap, especially in a love relationship where the stakes can feel really high. So I encourage women to start to notice where you overfunction. Just become aware of that and consider, if you were to do something that felt good to you, what would that be? And just kind of toy with the idea. Let your subconscious mind and your nervous system get comfortable with the idea of doing that. And as you play with that idea long enough, maybe a couple weeks, eventually you'll find that it will start to feel comfortable and familiar. Now it doesn't feel so threatening, and now you can do it. So, a little example might be that maybe on a Tuesday night you get home from work and you're really tired, and typically your overfunctioning would have you checking in with your partner to see how they're feeling, kind of assessing the mood. What do they need? How are you going to orbit around them? You're going to get dinner ready. But on this particular night, you've noticed that you're feeling really tired and maybe they're kind of in a cranky mood, but you've decided that what you need is some quiet time in bed with a book or a journal just to take 30 minutes to decompress. And if they're cranky, you can check in with them later, but really you can kind of give them some space because their feelings are their responsibility, and you can let them take care of them and you take care of you, right? And you put yourself first in that equation. And as people are listening to this at first, they might think that sounds really, really scary. But if you play with the idea that you could do that, eventually you will be able to do that.
So it's essentially using visualization to get your brain and your nervous system to a place where action is possible. So, first, it's awareness and tuning into what are my actual feelings? What do I actually want and need in this moment? And then visualizing doing something different, which might feel uncomfortable or scary at first, but the more you visualize it, the more comfortable you become. And then, and only then, when you're feeling more comfortable and confident, it's about taking small steps to turn those visualizations into actual behavioral change.
Yeah, and here's the really cool thing about how the human mind works is it actually doesn't know real from imaginary. And as therapists, we can use that to our advantage to help people heal. We do it all the time, where we will visualize doing it the way that feels good or feels safe or the outcome that you want. We know that sports athletes do this as well. They visualize playing the game well or competing well because the brain doesn't know real from imaginary. So if you are rehearsing this in your mind many times over, the brain basically considers that you've actually been doing it that way. And so that's why we develop a familiarity with it just by thinking about it. So, yeah, you're right. If we imagine, what am I feeling? What am I needing? And then what would I do? If I could just do it however I wanted right now, how would I do it? If we imagine that enough times, eventually we do develop the courage to then put that into action. Now, the scary point here for a lot of overfunctioning women is what's going to be their partner's response. Because overfunctioning is so predicated on regulating our partner. It's so built upon managing their emotions, making sure that they're okay with how we're showing up, making sure that if they're upset, we will solve that problem to help them feel better. So if we do less of that, we come home on a rough Tuesday night and we take a little bit of time for ourselves, but they are historically used to us coming home and tending to them. How's that going to go? And the challenge with underfunctioning partners is they don't have the emotional toolkit to be able to handle the feelings that are coming up for them. That's what has fueled a lot of this overfunctioning is you sense that. You know that if left to their own devices, this is not going to go well. So you're going to step in and do the emotional work for them. So if you're stepping back and you're not doing that emotional work for them, what's going to happen? Are they going to erupt? Are they going to blame you? Is this going to turn into a bigger thing? And throughout the earlier stages of the self restoration process, the overfunctioning woman is evaluating, is it worth it? Is it worth taking care of myself because there might be a bit of a temper tantrum, if you will, or some type of backlash or retaliation or natural consequences that are really hard?
Hmm. Yeah, even as you were saying that, and again, I don't know if this is just me or if this is indicative for overfunctioning women as a whole, but one of my biggest struggles, challenges, things that makes me feel a lot of anxiety is this thought of people being angry or disappointed at me. And a lot of the drive to overfunction is to ensure that, partner, friend, whoever it is that I'm interacting with is not angry or disappointed in me. And in the self restoration process, it seems that that is something that we need to get a little bit more comfortable with, like being able to stand in our own wants and needs and desires and essentially take the stance of how you react to that standing in my own wants and needs and desires is your business, not mine.
That's right. So I always say their response is their responsibility.
Mm.
Yeah. So what we have to understand as humans is that how someone reacts or responds to us, to our feelings, to our needs, that's about their psychology. It's really not about us. And they have a right to whatever response or reaction or feeling or thought they're having. We may think they're very, very wrong. Their perception is not accurate, and that's okay. But they do have a right to think and feel and respond however they want to. And then we have a right to say, your response doesn't work for me. Your response doesn't feel safe to me. So it is very, very important that we develop the ability to be okay with other people not being okay and not being okay with us.
And how do you actually do that? Like, is it almost like a building a tolerance? Like, I'm going to start with one small step, like take in your reaction and just sit with myself? Like, what is the best strategy for shifting that relational pattern?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have to remember that the other way we've been doing this isn't working, right? Absorbing their emotion, regulating their emotion, trying to make sure that they see us a certain way, which is what gets us into over explaining, which is a part of overfunctioning. We go on for 2 hours trying to make sure that they understand. We write the really long letters and emails trying to make sure they understand. But really, underfunctioning partners don't really have an interest in understanding us. They have an interest in maintaining their psychology, maintaining their victim position, maintaining their view on us. So we can say whatever we want, it's not really going to move the needle. So we have to remember we have tried overfunctioning. We have tried to get them to have a different response, and it hasn't worked. So we can anchor into that when we're trying something different. And then, yeah, it is about really flexing this nervous system tolerance for feeling uncomfortable because it is uncomfortable when people aren't happy with us. Like, I don't like it either. I can tolerate it very well, but it's not my favorite thing to do. So we learn tolerance skills for how to go through that. And what that's going to be is remembering their response is their responsibility. It's more about their psychology. I don't need to over explain myself. I don't need to apologize for how I'm feeling or what I'm needing or how I'm showing up. I need to go regulate myself while I'm feeling uncomfortable with them not being okay. So, what will that look like? And so, part of self restoration is learning what is soothing for you, what helps you feel safe in that moment within yourself. So for me, I go on a lot of walks. That's one main way that I get my nervous system regulated. And we have a ton of brain science showing that walks really balance the brain. We feel better. We have better problem solving and creative skills after a good walk. But listening to something soothing can be very helpful. Connecting with a safe person, a good friend, or a pet even can be very helpful. Leaving the room. So many overfunctioning women are highly empathic. So when their partner isn't feeling good, isn't feeling okay, isn't feeling regulated, she's feeling all that energy oozing out of them and it's dysregulating. And she hasn't yet learned that energetic boundary of they can have whatever feelings they're having and we don't have to absorb it, right? So sometimes just leaving the space, whether it's leaving the house, going to a coffee shop, going into a different room, setting some kind of barrier, whether it's physical or even emotional or mental, so that you're putting a little bit of space between whatever emotion they're choosing to be in, whatever thoughts they're having, whatever reactions coming up for them, and how you're doing.
So, just as their response is their responsibility, our ability to tolerate any discomfort that comes from these changes is our responsibility. And so, developing our own almost toolkit of here are the things when I am feeling overwhelmed or like I'm absorbing energy or like I had to make a stand and I'm feeling uncomfortable. Having these tools that we can use to get our nervous systems, our brain, our thinking back to a good place is going to support us as we go through this process of becoming a self restored woman.
Absolutely. And part of self restoration is having clarity, being able to clearly see this is what I'm feeling, this is what is happening for me, this is how I'm experiencing this dynamic, this is the meaning I am making out of it. I have clarity around that. But when I'm very dysregulated and activated by my partner's emotional dysregulation or upset, I can't hold my own clarity because I'm too caught up in their stuff. So it is very important for us to be able to step back and take responsibility for ourselves and for our clarity and to let them figure out what they're going to do to manage and regulate their own emotions. If this relationship has any shot at being healthy and fulfilling, both partners have to learn how to effectively regulate their own emotions. The overfunctioning woman tends to overfocus on them and make sure that they're regulated because if they're okay, then I'm okay. That's not a healthy model. And the underfunctioning partner tends to sit back, put their feet up, scream all of their emotion out or blame or point the finger or do whatever, and then wait for the overfunctioning woman to come in and clean it all up for them. That's not a healthy model either. Both people have to take responsibility for their own emotions, their own activation, their own needs.
So, it sounds like, or I would assume, just from a logical perspective, that when you start going through the self restoration process and you're making these different decisions to more align with your own wants and needs, when historically you have made decisions that were aligned with the wants and needs of your partner, that there are likely to be growing pains in the relationship, that your partner may not react positively when you start taking these stances. But to your point, it seems like in order for the relationship to remain intact, at some point, the other partner needs to kind of step up and meet you where you are at. So, when couples are going through this self restoration process, how can women observe and really lean into their partner's progress and like really understand, okay, is this just growing pains and my partner is getting used to my kind of like new self-aligned behavior, or are they actually not responding positively over a certain amount of time, and should I take action? Like, what are some helpful tips for navigating that process of your partner's growth and difference in responding to you?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to maybe step back just a little bit more and ask the question, is your partner growing? Because part of the nature of underfunctioning is not taking responsibility for yourself and waiting for your overfunctioning partner to do your work for you. So, unfortunately, a lot of times when the overfunctioning woman starts to heal herself and step out of doing all of the work, she says, hey, you've got to manage your own emotions. You've got to manage your own needs. You've got to use healthy communication and come to me kindly and respectfully when you want to have a conversation. That's what I expect. I'm not going to engage in this overfunctioning, underfunctioning dance anymore. Unfortunately, a lot of times underfunctioning partners don't really know what to do with that. They don't know how to step up, and the gap widens. She's not doing the work, but they're not doing it either. And the relationship gets further and further disconnected. So we have to ask, are they doing their work? If they are, then yes, there will be growing pains. Of course, this relationship is morphing into something new. And so there will be growing pains with that, and that's okay. But I think we want to look at, do both partners feel like they're both invested in finding their way through this together? Is there curiosity for each other's experience? Is there compassion for each other's experience? And Is there a united sense of, okay, we've got some work to do and we're going to do it? And is the underfunctioning partner really willing to look in the mirror and do this emotional work? Because their psychology from their childhood is that emotions are terrifying. They want nothing to do with them. So they avoid, deflect, deny, blame, whatever they need to do to stay far away from emotion. So if the overfunctioning woman isn't doing it anymore, are they going to step up? And that becomes the $1,000,000 question. And that's what makes self restoration in love so scary. Because if you grow and your partner doesn't keep pace, what does that mean for the future of this relationship?
So when one partner stays stuck in their underfunctioning and one partner moves forward in healing their overfunctioning, that can create a situation where maybe the question becomes, is this the right relationship for me?
Yeah, it becomes unfulfilling. For the overfunctioning woman who's self restoring, it can feel like there's not much of a relationship left. If she's not doing all the work to hold it together and her partner isn't stepping up and picking up the appropriate load that is theirs to carry, there isn't much going on. There aren't deep conversations happening. There isn't soulful connection going on. They might do the day to day roommate life really well, but that connection isn't there. And she's not willing to pretend anymore and hold it all together to make it look like there's a connection and really there isn't. So oftentimes this is the point where the overfunctioning woman who is self-restoring says, this doesn't work for me. I want, and I now know that I deserve to truly feel seen and cherished and understood and safe. Like she's no longer willing to try to make a feast out of breadcrumbs.
And regardless of what happens in the relationship, I mean, really, every human deserves to feel that in their partnership.
Absolutely. That really is the bare minimum. The overfunctioning woman is so afraid she's asking for too much when what she's asking for is the bare minimum. We deserve to feel seen and safe and understood. We deserve to feel like our partner is curious about us and really wants to do this relationship together. That's what we all deserve.
So you're speaking now to essentially like the gifts of going through the self restoration process, that you get to a point where you are fully committed to your own worth and knowing what you deserve in a relationship, which is a huge gift. What are some of the other benefits, both at an individual and at a relational level, that women may experience going through this process?
Well, kind of like you were saying, what happens when you're in overfunctioning? I think on the flip side of self restoration, you really get to know yourself and you realize what an incredible human you are. It breaks my heart when I'm at the beginning stages of work with a woman and she says, I'm really scared to get to know who I am. What if I don't like her? And I always say, what if you love her? Like, what if you're blown away by how amazing she is? And the really cool thing, I can say this as a therapist who has ushered a lot of people through this journey, is I guarantee you that the fear that you won't like yourself is coming from this current place that you're in where you don't like how things are going, but this isn't your authentic you. Like over functioning is not your authentic self, right? As you move through self restoration, you will get to know yourself. And I guarantee, hands down, every dollar I have, that you will love this woman inside. You will, I promise, because self restoration is coming home to yourself, which means you are connecting with the most authentic version of you. You're not apologizing for your feelings. They are not too much. They're just too much for someone who doesn't know how to handle them. But in and of themselves, they're beautiful. You will discover what lights you up in this life. You will discover how passionate you are, how much love you have to give. And you will just be in awe of this incredible woman that is inside of you who was actually buried under all of this over functioning and partner pleasing and anxiety and guilt and self doubt. Like you were just a shell of a person. But when you come home to yourself, it's magic. So to get to the end of your life and to know who you are is incredible. And that's what self restoration gives us.
And what a gift, not only for navigating overfunctioning or relationships, but coming home to yourself, to your point, allows you to move through life as your most authentic self. It is going to have a ripple effect on every single area of your life, from the relationships you pursue to the career choices to your hobbies and goals. When we can really see ourselves with that clarity and connect with the most authentic version of who we are at the core, that empowers us to create more joy and fulfillment and contentment and all of the good stuff, like across the board, not just in relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think when we really like ourselves and we're proud of the woman that we are, then we just emanate this energy, this love, and this joy. And we are drawn to other people who really like themselves, like authentically like themselves. So when we talk about the overfunctioning woman really has to pair up with the underfunctioning partner, the self restored woman really has to pair up with a very healthy functioning partner who also really likes who they are. And this pairing becomes a very intentional choice. I have chosen to get to know who I am, and then I get the privilege of choosing a partner who has also gotten to know themselves, and we are choosing to do this together. With overfunctioning, we're really swept up in the current of just how things are. If our partner is emotionally dysregulated, okay, I guess I have to just set my stuff aside and take care of them. With self-restoration, it's like I get to be very intentional about every move I make and every choice I make. I'm not swept up in the current of how things are, how they should be, how they've always been. I'm always deciding what will work for me, what will help me feel safe, what will feel good to me. And I lead with that while also considering and factoring in the people that are really important to me.
And to tie it to the concept of this podcast, that authenticity and that intentionality is like a North Star when you are stuck, right? Because it is leading you when you can feel into, what do I actually want? Where am I actually struggling? What do I actually need? And really be able to tap into your own wisdom. It's almost like a roadmap for, like, here are the steps you need to take. Here is where you need to go. Like, from the most authentic place in yourself, this is the next version of you, and this is the next version of your life. And here's how to get there.
That's right. Yeah, it's always pointing us to the next step. We can't always see the whole staircase. We've heard that quote, but we can take the next step. And I'm a big believer that when we take the next step, then the path continues to appear. And we're just led by our authentic self and what feels good for us. And if we make small decisions around what would feel good to me right now, what would help me feel safe, what would light me up, if we make small decisions from that place, those add up to big decisions. And suddenly we have this life that feels really good. When you're caught and stuck in overfunctioning, you're treading water. And you're fantasizing about the vacation to just kind of take me out of this, give me a break from it all. But when you're in self restoration, I don't mean to make this sound like it's perfect because it's not, it's still life and life still life's, right? But when we're in self restoration and we are, for the most part, surrounding ourselves with things that feel good, that help us feel safe, experiences and relationships and opportunities and spaces that just feel aligned, you can't help but feel good most of the time in your life and you're not stuck.
Can confirm that, at least from my experience, there is no better feeling than looking at your life and really feeling that it's all on purpose, that like this is what I choose. And to your point, it's not perfect. You may find yourself like feeling stuck at times. You'll still have challenges in your relationship. But when you can really look around and say, this is the life I chose from that place of authenticity, it's an incredibly powerful experience.
It is. And I have found personally that the pride that I feel within myself is amazing. And it's something I get to carry in my heart forever. I'm so proud of myself for taking the risk. And it felt so risky to step out of overfunctioning. I knew that if I took those brave steps, it was all going to fall apart. I knew. But I also knew that trying to hold it all together was killing me inside. I was physically sick. I was emotionally tapped out. I was not the best version of myself. And so I took those courageous steps. I had clarity as to what I wanted. I worked on what I deserved. And I have handcrafted a life very intentionally, every little choice. And I look around now and I'm just so proud of myself. And so, yeah, I can have down days. Yes, I can feel a little stuck now and then, but I know how to move myself through it. And that's the magic. I don't need everyone else to like me. I don't need them to be happy with me. I don't need to feel responsible for their emotions. I know how to move myself through this in a way that feels really good. And what other people choose to do with that is what other people choose to do with that. But I really like my life and I want every human to experience that. It's so magical.
What's the saying? Sometimes you need to fall apart so you can put yourself back together. Yeah, it's scary to think about the life that you've built, even if it's a life that isn't right for you. It's scary to think about that coming down. But ultimately, the falling apart is an opportunity to rebuild your life in a way that's more aligned with who you are, what you want, and how you want to move through life.
That's right. I use the analogy of a house a lot because it's just such a great example. You could be living in a house that, yeah, it works, but you don't like it. It doesn't fit your lifestyle or your style or decor or whatever it is. Or maybe it has some issues, right? Maybe it's got some real issues and it needs to be leveled. If you want a whole new house, like you've got to tear down the old one that's not working for you before you have the space to even be able to build a new one. And when you're building a new house, you're making a lot of small decisions that add up to a house, right? And so when you're self restoring, you're making a lot of little decisions, some that feel bigger than others, but a lot of little decisions along the way. And then some big decisions that ultimately are helping you build something that's a better reflection of the person you are today. And that's where you feel pride, and that's where you feel joy and gratitude, and that's where you feel safe within yourself because now you know that if they're not happy with you, if they don't like you, if they don't agree with you, if they're not in your life anymore, like, okay, that's not a fun experience, but you're going to be okay because you have just watched yourself rise up from these ashes and build something incredible for yourself. You've got your own back. You're never truly alone because you always have this authentic, amazing, deep connection with yourself.
Mm. I just love that so, so much. Dr. Ashley, this conversation was so incredible. And I feel like just really got to the core of what the self restoration process is and how it helps you come home to yourself, which is an incredible journey for us all to go on. If anyone listening wants to learn more about the self restoration process and start taking steps towards addressing their overfunctioning and stepping into this process, how can they do that?
So I would say find me on Instagram. My handle is at Dr. Ashley Southard. I post a ton of content on there about overfunctioning, underfunctioning, and self restoration. So you'll get a lot of content and insight into this process. You'll also be surrounded by 70,000 plus women who get it, who are on their own self restoration journeys. And like we said at the beginning, there's magic in that community. And then you can head over to my website, drashleysouthard.com. I have a library of masterclasses and PDF toolkits all focused on various aspects of the self-restoration process, whether you're wanting to get the 30,000-foot overview and learn my 7-step process for how exactly to do this. I have a class for moms who are saying, okay, yeah, I want to step back from overfunctioning in my love relationship, but I don't want the natural consequences to fall on my kids. So, how do I navigate that and protect my kids? I have a whole class on that. I have a whole class on the psychology of overfunctioning, where it comes from, and literally how do you change your mind, like we were talking a little bit about today. And I have a class on when you're no longer regulating your partner, but they continue to be dysregulated. How do you navigate that? I call it navigating the nonsense, and giving you 10 tried and true strategies for how to keep yourself well, regardless of what they choose to do or not do. So you can go to my website and find all of that content as well.
Oh, those all sound amazing. I can't wait to check those out further. Dr. Ashley, again, this was such an impactful, incredible episode. So, as we near the end of each episode, I have one question that I like to ask all of my guests. And I've already asked you, but would love to hear if you have a different perspective today.
Ooh, okay.
Okay, so picturing your ideal future self, like the Dr. Ashley that you are working every day to one day grow into. If she could travel back in time and talk to the today, like present day version of you, what advice do you think she would give you on how to navigate any stuckness that you might feel at this point in your life?
I think what she would say, I'm just thinking about some little areas where I can lean into some stuckness. And I think what she would say is stay aligned with your value system, coming back to doing what feels right to you, and it will all work itself out. That's what I think she would say.
Well, future Dr. Ashley is unsurprisingly very wise. So I think that's advice that can really
Thank you.
resonate with all of us. So I'll be taking that with me as we wrap up the interview. But again, Dr. Ashley, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
That's it for today. A huge thank you to our guests for their incredible insights, and a huge thank you to you, our listeners. We know that there are so many podcasts out there to choose from, and we are just so grateful that you chose ours. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider recommending the podcast to a friend or family member that you think would enjoy it. And to make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. And while you're there, if you loved the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review. It plays such a huge part in getting this podcast out to a wider audience and ultimately supporting more people on their journey from stuck to unstuck. And to keep in touch and access even more stuck-related content, follow us on Instagram at Season of Stuck and visit our website, seasonofstuck.com, where you can sign up to get episodes delivered directly to your inbox. Thank you again for being here. It is so, so appreciated. Until next time, I'm Deanna DeBera, and you're listening to Season of Stuck.